later, he gets a call from the crime lab, and the forensic scientist says to Jean, hey, are you interested in the male DNA that we found on Jennifer's swimsuit? And it was like, what do you mean, male DNA? The scientist tells Jean that there is male DNA in the form of spermatozoa in the crotch of Jennifer's swimsuit. This is a bombshell because not only are we learning for the first time that we do have DNA evidence from an unknown perpetrator, but we also learn at that same time that this DNA profile was entered into the state and the national DNA database, and it did not match the DNA in the Michelle Welch case. This is crazy. We have two different killers. Like, what is going on? So the first thing that Jean did was to go back through and look at who had been identified and eliminated previously, either by alibi or in some cases by DNA, and then pull those people back up again and resubmit their samples so that they could be compared against the DNA profile in Jennifer's case.
Detectives submit the DNA found on Jennifer's swimsuit to CODIS, but there's no match. With the case still unsolved at the end of 2014, Detective Jean Miller makes the difficult decision to retire, leaving the case with Detective Wade.
Detective Wade is one of those people that if you're a bad guy, you do not want her in your rearview mirror because she will not quit.
This was a case that I grew up with, and I wanted to know what happened. When I took over the case, I recognized that the cases were so massive that I took on the daunting task of creating a database so that I could take every single male name that appeared in either one of the cases, and I entered that name into this database, along with whether or not they had DNA in CODIS, whether or not we had collected their DNA as a part of the investigation, were they dead, were they incarcerated. There were like 2,300 plus names in the database.
As Detective Wade searches for Jennifer's killer, the Bastian family mourns another loss. In 2015, Jennifer's father dies. He goes to the grave without seeing justice done.
Our faith has seen us through a lot. And sure, he wanted to know. You carry the burden you carry. That's just life and its natural progression. When you've got a burden, you carry it. We all do.
I met Patty and Ralph in 2013, working on the case, and I can't explain it, but for whatever reason, Patty and I just clicked, and she was really inspirational to me. We got to really know each other on a deeper level, and really gained a mutual respect for each other.
In early 2015, FBI agent Terry Postman, working for one of the FBI's satellite offices, helped Detective Wade with the case by obtaining DNA samples from a wider pool of possible suspects.
One of the primary roles is to collaborate on cases and investigations. How we prioritize who we were going to collect DNA from was based on the reason they were originally included in the investigation.
One sample leads them outside of Tacoma to Aberdeen.
We believe that this individual is living there in Aberdeen, right? And so we have a couple of addresses, and Lindsay and I went to the local police department there, and they're like, oh yeah, this guy lives down here by the river. They took us to him. The van is just packed full of stuff. You can't even see that he's in there. He had stuff strapped onto the back of the van. It was pretty surreal, but you just never knew, right? You never knew. Is this gonna be him? He was parked in a van under his overpass, living in the van right next to the river that goes through Aberdeen there. Obviously, we introduced ourselves, right? I'm Detective Wade, Tacoma Police Department. This is FBI Special Agent Postma. The reason that we're here today is in relation to a cold case homicide from 1986, and we would like to eliminate you as a suspect. And he willingly gave the sample.
Analysts run the DNA sample, but it's another letdown. The DNA from the man in Aberdeen doesn't match the DNA found in Jennifer's swimsuit.
Here we have Jenny's case that's actively being investigated, and we have a profile. We don't know whose it is. It's frustrating, right? It's frustrating.
Despite the years of frustration and all the dead ends, Detective Wade never gives up.
This case was so important to me for many reasons. I never dreamed as a youngster that I would be in a position one day to work on the case.
Lindsay worked so hard on these two cases. She was 11 years old when this happened to Jenny. There's just something about Lindsay and her total dedication, her total involvement, her intelligence. She gave so much for us as a community.
With leads once again running thin, Detective Wade learns of a murder case in Arizona.
I heard about a woman named Colleen Fitzpatrick who had helped the Phoenix Police Department solve these cold cases from, I think it was 1990 or 91. And I talked to the detectives on that case, and when they told me what she had done using genealogy, I was intrigued, to say the least. So with the help of the FBI, we were able to pay for Colleen's assistance in working on the case. Our crime lab basically created a profile from the DNA from the swimsuit, and YSTR DNA is DNA that's passed down from father to son. And so theoretically, if you follow the paternal line, the last name should stay the same. We gave Colleen the YSTR profile. She did her research and looked through her genealogy databases and came up with 3 potential last names for the suspect based on that DNA. The 3 names were Smith, Holbrook, and Washburn. No one in the case file named Holbrook. So I went back and I looked at Washburn, and I saw that a guy named Robert Washburn had called in a tip back in May of 1986 in Michelle's case. So this was before Jennifer was killed.
And he says that he had seen a jogger, and he often jogs in Point Defiance Park, and he had seen someone through there that maybe they should look at, someone that might be suspicious.
The detectives, they didn't find anything unusual about him, and so they just wrote the report up and moved on to continue investigating. He made it into my high priority offender pile of people that I wanted to get DNA from, but he certainly wasn't the only one.
His name is there, so they have to try to get some answers.
We would have done the basic record checks and determined that he was most likely living there in Illinois, had a house address, had a driver's license and photo. I contacted the local FBI resident agency and provided them with the necessary information and said we're asking people to voluntarily provide their DNA samples so they can be eliminated as a suspect. Can you have somebody go out and attempt to contact this person?
The FBI goes to Washburn and says, "Can we have your DNA?" He says, "Sure," and he gives it to him.
I called the agent out there. I asked him, was there anything remarkable about your contact with him? And it was just very routine, very straightforward.
I mean, what is going on here? I don't know if we're ever going to get to the bottom of the case. There were days when I would go into my office and I would look at the stacks of case files and think, this case is unsolvable. Once we had collected all of these DNA samples, we decided to start submitting them to the crime lab. But this honestly is kind of like searching for a needle in a haystack. The first batch came back with no matches. Then I sent the second batch and waited for months. I sent my last batch of samples to the crime lab in January of 2018. And by this point, I was not optimistic at all that anybody in these samples was the suspect.
As she waits for results from this last batch of samples, Detective Wade is forced to make a difficult choice.
I had been approached to apply for a job with the Attorney General's office to work on the sexual assault kit initiative. And I did a lot of soul searching, trying to decide, do I really want to leave now? But that's ultimately what I decided to do. The hardest part about leaving is not having solved Jennifer and Michelle's cases. Like, it was just terrible. But there was something in the back of my mind that thought maybe working on the sexual assault kit testing will provide an answer. Maybe one of these untested sexual assault kits will provide a match. My last day was April 13th, 2018, and I was gone 25 days, and I get a phone call. It was from the detective who took over for me, and he said, "Are you sitting down?" And he tells me we have a match on Jennifer Bastian. I'm speechless at this point, and I'm also like tearing up. So I'm like, well, who is it? What's the name? And he says, it's Robert Washburn. I got dressed really quick and went back to the station so that I could help dig through the case to pull out the information about Robert Washburn.
Robert Washburn graduated from high school in the Tacoma area and worked for a while as an engineer at Boeing. He moved to Illinois and was living a very quiet life, caring for his disabled daughter.
That was a fast nap.
Neighbors described him, it's almost a cliche, as a quiet guy who kind of kept to himself, but seemed dedicated to his daughter.
At the time of Jennifer's murder, Robert Washburn was living just 9 blocks from the Bastian family.
Someone in our office here in Tacoma called out there and let them know that Tacoma PD would be coming out, that there was a match to this person and they would have a warrant for his arrest.
They got eyes on Robert Washburn pretty quickly, and the SWAT team in Eureka arrest him.
Police arrest Washburn and begin his extradition to Washington.
I think the arrest took place around 7 a.m. And so immediately one of the assistant chiefs and myself drove from the police department to Patty's home and knocked on her door. I had rehearsed in my head something to say to her. Of course, it all went out the window, and I couldn't remember what I was going to say.
Doorbell rings, open the door, and she just says, "We got him." Lindsay and I are hugging one another and alternately crying and laughing and crying and laughing. Just the raw emotion. Just an awesome, awesome reality that took over. And my first thought, I gotta call Teresa.
She does the whole, I've got someone here who wants to say something to you. And then I hear Teresa, it's Lindsay, we got him. And I dropped to my knees. I just said, tell me everything. When I heard the name Robert Washburn, it didn't mean anything to me. I couldn't come up with anything. I don't know any connection.
Robert Washburn's behind bars. He's voluntarily given his DNA. It matches to Jennifer Bastian, to the evidence left at the crime scene. But he pleads not guilty. And we all know anything can happen in a jury room. Will they trust that that DNA was preserved? It's decades old. Was it tested properly? So there is still a very real fear that he could get away with murder.
We had hoped that Robert Washburn would talk and answer a lot of the questions that we all have, but he declined to do that.
Weeks after his arrest, 60-year-old Robert Washburn was arraigned in a Pierce County court and charged with the first-degree murder of Jennifer Bastian. Washburn pleads not guilty.
My overwhelming fear was that this case would go to trial because my mom is in Tacoma alone, and I really was quite anxious and fearful about what that would look like.
I think the idea of a trial was the biggest black cloud since his arrest. There's a bunch of things that he may have to say that I don't want to know.
As a family, like, no one wants to sit through that. No one wants to sit in the courtroom and look at graphic photographs of their family member who's been sexually assaulted and murdered. I mean, that's horrifying.
The judge sets a 2019 trial date, but just 3 months later, the Bastian family receives a phone call that changes everything.
It was the prosecutor saying they felt Washburn was ready to change his plea. They were clear it wouldn't necessarily be the longest sentence they would hope for, but under the situation, it would be no trial, and given his age, it kind of made sense to not push the issue.
It took 32 long, painful years, but finally the Bastian family gets a measure of justice.
Walking into the courtroom that day was really intense because it's all kind of like overwhelming to see so many old friends and family and colleagues of my dad. What made it really clear how important this case was still for so many people.
I mean, Lindsay tried to prepare me, but I knew I was going to see him. I wanted to see him.
And then when it was our time to walk into the courtroom and stand in the same room as him, it was impactful, but it also left a lot to be desired because he didn't make eye contact. He just kind of sat there.
There was no eye to eye. He never raised his head, looked down the whole time.
I went to the sentencing, and it was really emotional. I don't think there was a dry eye in the courtroom, from the judge to one of the cameramen in the courtroom to people in the gallery. I remember Patty saying, "Do you know how many birthdays we missed and how many Christmases we missed?" I mean, you pretty much have to be a psychopath to sit through that and not tear up.
As the Bastian family watches, Washburn admits he murdered Jennifer back in 1986.
He's strangely stoic in the courtroom. A written statement is read saying, he's sorry. He admits that he grabbed Jennifer and strangled her. He never admits to or talks about the sexual assault. And there's very little revealed about his motives, why he did it, how he did it, other than that he strangled this little girl.
He basically confessed in the most bare bones way possible that he had murdered Jennifer. Period.
Robert Washburn is sentenced to 26 and a half years in prison.
Me as a detective, I want to solve the case, and I'm excited when the case is solved. But that family is now ripping off a scab, and all the pain, all the grief, all the trauma, it's bad. That's something that has to really be considered and addressed from the law enforcement perspective when one of these cases is solved, is that it's not just happy feelings.
That is not the end for Patty, and it's not the end for Teresa. This family is determined to make sure that this isn't just about one girl's murder or two girls' murders. This is about keeping young people safer everywhere.
So starting in 2015, we teamed up and we introduced a number of bills to really move forward on the DNA collection. We had people leaving the court that had never given their DNA and all kind of problems. And then in 2018, we passed House Bill 1326 is when we really brought it all together to expand who we collect the DNA from and closing the most loopholes. It was bipartisan support, and it was really a huge team effort with Patty and Detective Wade.
On May 21st, 2019, the governor of Washington, with Patty Bastian by his side, signs the new legislation, now named Jennifer and Michelle's Law.
Thank you for never letting us feel alone for the past 32 years. The fact that the bill itself was named the Jennifer and Michelle's Law is just pretty awesome. Pretty darned awesome.
On March 22nd, 2022, a Pierce County man is found guilty of Michelle Welch's murder. He is sentenced to more than 26 years in prison. DNA evidence helps link him to the crime.
This country needs a national law about what to do with DNA, when to collect it, when to put it in the database, and it's got to be before a felon is released from prison. It's to help the guilty and the innocent. It's to help parents.
So he had just cashed that insurance check the day that he went missing. Frank was supposed to return the previous night, had cash on his person, and did not return. So obviously our concern there is, okay, has something happened to him, or has he voluntarily left and not returned?
Frank was born September 20th, 1973 in Linwood, California. He was a good baby. He loved to joke. He loved to tease you and do whatever he could do to get your attention. Frank would get into his dad's fishing poles, and he always got by me and had that fishing pole and say, "I'm outside." Because he would practice. He would throw the fishing rod like he's catching fish and reel it in. Get him anything to do with fishing, and he was so happy. My husband Doug and I separated when Frank was about 8 years old. We'd had a lot of ups and downs, and we just couldn't make it anymore. And Frank went to live with his dad up in Redding. It was hard, but I didn't want him to stay with me, putting him on a car to get around it. I needed to establish my life. So yes, at the time, I thought he was better off with his dad.
Doug and Frankie were constantly doing stuff together. We live so close to the river, and the weather's so hot here in Redding for about 7 months out of the year that that's what you get to do. You go to the river.
One of the things you do as a new detective is familiarize yourself with cold cases. But I hadn't looked at the McAllister case since 2012, so it's like 6 years. In interviews with suspects, you always try and get a rapport going with that person. I introduced myself to him, and I just told him, I looked at this case 6 years ago. I said, I haven't looked at it since. I'm going to give you your time.
So I'd like to hear those points of what you have to say. My girlfriend, Sean Holder, she had an idea to, she wanted to murder Frank. Because he had much of anything about burn down Frank. She gave me a knife. She showed it to me in the bedroom. Although I was like, she was going to be a knife at that time. That's what she wanted to use to get the knife.
Later that day, Frank shows up at the apartment. Ryan told Frank that he could be the middleman for that methamphetamine deal. The four of them get in Frank's car together. Frank's driving the car. Ryan's seated right behind Frank. Curtis Colder's in the right front passenger seat. and Shauna's sitting right behind her brother. Brian directs Frank to drive to the Shingle Town area. They get back to this real remote area, and they sit in the car and talk for a couple of hours. Brian tells me that Shauna kind of nudges him and pulls out the knife that she had shown him.
What exactly did she say to you guys to stab him? She's telling you to stab him.
That's when Brian tells me Curtis pulls his own knife out.
And who stabbed him? Curtis did from house.
Brian tells me that Frank gets out of the vehicle and falls down on the ground just outside his car.
What made you guess? What made you try to do that? I don't know. You just have to told me a whole bunch of things. Yeah, so you just that, yeah. What made you stop? Because of yelling. You were yelling? Yeah. Screaming. What were you screaming? I don't know.
He's crying. He was visibly shaking uncontrollably at times. You could tell he was seeing it all over Noon's head. He said he didn't got off of it. He recalled Curtis grabbing Frank and dragging him up towards the front of the vehicle.
I heard him say, "Hey, Brian, look." And he dropped a big rock on his head. Yeah. He just dropped it on his head.
Brian told me that Shauna and Curtis drug Frank's body up into the trees. They get into the car. Brian says he drives to Costco while Shauna and Curtis are inside making phone calls for a taxi. Brian tells me that he grabs like a newspaper and he's trying to wipe up blood the best that he can. And then Shauna and Curtis came out of Costco. Shauna and Curtis pull out a big wad of cash.
They gave us some money. There was blood on it.
Brian told me that Shauna and Curtis gave him a few $100s, and they essentially parted ways.
And then scared to death ever since.
With Brian Hawkins' televised confession set to air in less than 24 hours, letting detectives race to find the culprits.
We're really on the clock at this point, and the stars aligned. Within like a few hours, they had tracked both the brother and sister, Shauna and Curtis Culver, down to the town south of us, Relove. So they headed out that next morning. Curtis agreed to come up to that meeting. Shauna dug her heels in and was refusing to come out.
I don't want to do it. I'm not doing it. I'm not going to come anymore.
Is there a reason why?
No, I don't want to be doing this anymore. Unless you're going to detain me and arrest me.
Hold on.
And I said, well,
You're reading. I think you do. I think you do.
Just as KRCR airs Brian Hawkins' admission.
A confession nearly 25 years in the making from Brian Keith Hawkins.
I know the law can't be changed, but this is as close as I can come to doing the right thing. It's kind of weird that Frank never even got to have a life, and either did I.